I'm Wendy Watson-Wright. I'm the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission and Assistant Director General of UNESCO, which of course is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. Well, you know, it's very difficult to say specifically that science is responsible for peace, because I think there are, you know, negative examples of that. But having said that, I am a firm proponent of the fact that science and diplomacy they go together. And in fact, science is often sent ahead of policymakers in terms of bringing countries together. And I think that useful dialogue among scientists does bring countries together in many aspects. And in particular, I could say for international warning systems. Clearly, we have a very good example in the global tsunami warning systems, where we are helping to bring together countries to dialogue and to work with each other in order that we can all be more safe from natural disasters such as tsunamis. Well, of course, the first, I guess, challenge is the fact that many tsunamis are created as a result of earthquakes, and so predicting earthquakes would be wonderful, or underwater landslides in advance of a tsunami would be excellent, but we are not there yet. As a planet, we are not able to predict when a seismic event will occur. But following that, of course, the challenges for tsunamis are to adequately predict, will a certain underwater event create a tsunami, and what is the likelihood of that? And in order for us to do that, of course, we need equipment, and we need a system, and we need people to be involved in doing that. Following the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean, I think that significant progress has been made. The IOC, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, has in fact since 1965 been responsible for coordinating the Pacific tsunami warning system. But after the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, we were mandated then to create 3 other tsunami warning systems, one in the Indian Ocean, obviously, one in the Northeast Atlantic and Mediterranean and connected seas, and one in the Caribbean. And in fact, there has been a lot of progress made. For example, in October of last year, in the Indian Ocean, the 3 regional tsunami watch providers took on the role of providing these alert systems for the Indian Ocean, whereas previously the interim service had been provided by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. In addition, in the Northeast Atlantic and Mediterranean, as of July-August this year, France, Turkey, and Greece have begun issuing alerts in their areas. And we are looking forward to having the Caribbean system more established by 2014. So we still have work to do, clearly, in certain areas of the Indian Ocean, in the Caribbean, in the Northeast Atlantic and Mediterranean, but we have come a long way, and I think it's because of the goodwill among countries and that and the recognition that, you know, it's not my tsunami, it's not your tsunami, it's our tsunami, and we're all in this together, and we're only as strong as the weakest link. As I've mentioned previously, the role of the IOC of UNESCO is to coordinate international tsunami warning systems in 4 parts of the world. We do the coordination, whereas the national tsunami watches are provided through national centers. Following the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, and when IOC was mandated to start a tsunami warning system there and in other places, the idea was that since CTBTO had this wonderful infrastructure throughout the world, and much of it in the ocean, that perhaps this infrastructure could be used to help predict whether a certain seismic event would lead to a tsunami. That means, was it tsunamigenic? So there was a pilot period starting in 2005, This worked out very successfully. The data was reliable, the service was reliable, and of course CTBTO is reliable in terms of ensuring that things are done right. And what that led to was in February of 2010 was the signing of an MOU between my Director General, Irina Bokova of UNESCO, and your Executive Secretary, Tibor Toth, in Paris. I was at that signing. And largely it's around tsunami warning and also around capacity development. But having listened to the conversation today on science and ethics and all these sorts of things, I think that UNESCO and CTBTO could actually be collaborating on a lot more issues. The S in UNESCO is for science, and clearly CTBTO is a lot about science, so I think this is an area for further collaboration. I would like to say that it's not just the provision of scientific data where we're interacting with CTBTO. In fact, we've worked together in Haiti to develop the ability to react or prevent impacts due to seismic events and tsunamis. And CTBTO has established a center there. And we have been working on the ground with CTBTO in Haiti to develop the capacity within that country for tsunami warning and seismic warning and things like that. So I think this is another good example of the use of CTBTO abilities and infrastructure for peaceful means over and above what you do in your day jobs. It's high quality, highly reliable data that's coming from CTBTO. And it's very helpful to an organization like the IOC and all the tsunami watch providers to know that the data that we're getting is coming from such a reliable organization. And I'm happy to say that there are at least 10 countries now that have actually incorporated the CTBTO data into their national monitoring systems. There are about 6 countries in Southeast Asia, and then France, Australia, Turkey, and the US. And we're expecting more countries to sign on to do that as well. So I think that this is, for CTBTO, this is a very good sign that what's being provided is very valued and useful. And for us, it's very helpful as well. And I'm sure that the countries that have signed on are equally as pleased. Our help to the CTBTO, I think, has been more indirect. For example, we provide more eyes on the data and the communication, and so if there are any glitches, we are able to identify that. I would say that the 10 countries to whom I've just referred would also be providing that sort of eyes on data. And I think that we can be more help in the future if we I guess, think about more ways we can collaborate together and also identify areas that would need capacity development that the two of us could really contribute to very well. Well, of course, the IOC was heavily involved in the actual tsunami during the event, and you know, we don't do the alerts ourselves, but we certainly are involved, and I remember that day very well. But in the follow-up and in terms of the radioactivity which has gone into the ocean, we are interested in from the perspective of the health of the ocean environment, but we were not involved in the actual monitoring. There were other organizations, including some of the US oceanographic institutes, and the IAEA, of course, was very involved. But it's not within the remit of the IOC to be hands-on on that side. On the tsunami warning side, absolutely, and making sure that things are coordinated and keeping track of who's doing what, and going in afterward and doing the international review or the evaluation of what went well, what did not go well, what can be done better in the future. We always are doing lessons learned. And I found it interesting. Today there were many references to the Great East Japan tsunami and earthquake. And in fact, the rector of the UNU was here as well. And IOC and UNU last February, this past February, actually co-convened a symposium looking at lessons learned in Tokyo from this great East Japan tsunami and earthquake, and it was very instructive, I have to say, and will help us, I think, in terms of any other. We don't ever want a disaster of that magnitude and nature to help it happen again, but we know it's probably going to at some point, and so the more we can learn from these things, the better. Well, for me, the biggest lesson learned, apart from the fact is that we always need more science and more monitoring. We need more instruments to help predict in advance, and you know, the fact that the instruments that were there were helpful. That was a given. But I would say the more interesting lessons learned for me were on the social science side. And the biggest questions that came out of that were, why was it that some people evacuated early and some didn't evacuate early enough and therefore were caught? Much of it has to do, I mean, Japan is probably the most advanced country in the world in terms of teaching everyone what to do in the case of an earthquake and a possible tsunami, and they're very well educated, and the school children are educated. But the fact that some waited to evacuate seemed to be related to the fact that they felt that the seawall, if they were behind a seawall, or if they were in an area that had been designated as less at risk than another area, they seemed to think, well, we're okay, and only, you know, realized too late that they weren't and evacuated too late. Whereas the others, and many of the school children, in fact, the school children in some schools took it upon themselves to just get to high ground, and they went and they were saved, and this all came from their education and all the outreach activities. So I spoke today sort of about the hard and the soft infrastructure around these things, and it's the soft, it's the human behavior that really it comes down to it at the end of the day, and that with regard to any sort of disaster, natural or otherwise, it's the human behavior that at the end of the day either saves you or doesn't, and so that to me I found extremely interesting. Well, I'm not sure it's appropriate to try to compare a war to a natural disaster, because both really do lead to human misery, suffering, casualties, death, loss of infrastructure. And as well, I really do think that for countries, you know, it's very difficult. There are some hard decisions that always have to be made. We say, well, we know you're in an area where there's disaster prone. You could be suffering a disaster, but we don't know when. We don't know how big, and it's very difficult for countries, all countries, not just developed, but developing as well, to make the hard decisions today to invest in whatever it would take to prevent impacts in the future, when perhaps today you can't even find enough food. So yes, there are relationships, there are, I guess, parallels between the destruction caused by war and the destruction caused by natural disasters, but I think it's upon all of us to try and prevent both, or if you can't prevent it, at least to prevent the impacts from natural disasters, and that's what we're trying to do. As you talk about human security, more and more now, I find that climate change and climate variability is being looked at in the context of human security, and I think that's appropriate. I think many of the issues facing humanity these days on this blue planet of ours, which should have been called Planet Ocean, are related to human security. And I think that as time goes on, when we talk about sustainable development, when we talk about climate, when we talk about war, when we talk about natural disasters, it's all around the issue of human security. And I think if we could make sure that the dialogues flourish around this whole issue, we would make much more progress than if we all stay in our own little caves and silos and try to do our own thing without actually coming together. So. I I think that the number of graduates, of female graduates coming out of, at least out of developing countries, for example, or developed countries, is improving, and I believe that, you know, we're getting up to the 50% range. In some institutes and institutions, you know, there are more women graduating than men. I'm unhappy to say that the ocean sciences aren't there yet, for whatever reason. In the olden days, it used to be because of the infrastructure, meaning for oceanography, one is required to go out on ships for long periods of time, and the research vessels just were not equipped to have both sexes on board, or both genders. I'm happy to say that has improved and is improving, but, you know, we still have a long way to go. I think there's also the perception, or has been this perception for whatever reasons, that women, you know, you're just not wired right to go into science, and therefore you should go into teaching or something like that. We are overcoming that. When I say we, I would say the developed world. Within UNESCO, of course, I mentioned Priority Africa. The second overarching priority is gender equality, or gender equity at the very least. And certainly in developing countries, there are still very large challenges around the cultures and how they treat women, and how women are expected to behave. But even in that respect, we are seeing some improvement. For example, the L'Oreal UNESCO Prize for Women in Science. We're seeing some wonderful young women coming out of, you know, the Arab countries, Africa and other places. And I think as we have more role models like that, and as we are able, probably through social media, to advertise the fact that this is possible, and that young women can look forward to doing something like this, then we may have more success. And I do think that social media will help. But as I say, you know, we still have a challenge. I think we need to continue to push forward, and happy to hear that CTBTO is trying to focus on this as well. So this is another area, I think, where UNESCO and CTBTO could be working hand in hand.